Most men think they avoid conflict because they're nice, but that's not usually the truth. Many men avoid conflict because they're afraid of what will happen if they don't. They're afraid of anger, afraid of rejection, afraid of losing the relationship, afraid of being the bad guy. So they stay quiet. They tolerate things that should be addressed. They keep the peace. They let resentment build. And over time, something strange happens. The man who avoided conflict to protect the relationship ends up destroying the relationship anyway. Because peace built on silence is not peace, it's pressure. Today, we're going to talk about why men avoid conflict and how steady men learn to face it without becoming harsh or angry. So, what is the pattern of conflict avoidance? How do we recognize that? Most men who avoid conflict do not see themselves as weak. They see themselves as reasonable. They say things like, I just don't want to fight. I'm trying to keep the peace. It's not worth the argument. What's really happening is this. They are trading short-term comfort for long-term damage. Because every time something wrong goes unaddressed, something builds inside of you. There's resentment, there's distance, there's bitterness, and eventually it leaks out in unhealthy ways. We might see passive aggression, withdrawal, sarcasm, emotional shutdown. A man who refuses healthy conflict will eventually create unhealthy conflict. So, why men learn to avoid conflict? Where is the root of it? Most men didn't choose conflict avoidance consciously. They learned it somewhere. Sometimes it came from childhood. I can attest to that. Maybe you grew up in a house where conflict meant yelling, chaos, or punishment. Now, I didn't have that, but I saw it in other places. So you learned the safest move was to stay quiet. Now, other times, it came from relationships. Now, I did see this and I experienced this. Maybe you spoke up once and it exploded. So you learned better not say anything the next time. And then sometimes it comes from culture. Men are told two opposite lies at the same time. The first is men should never upset anyone. And second is real men dominate everyone. Neither of those produces a steady man. Steady men learn something different. They learn how to speak truth without losing control. So what avoiding conflict actually costs? What's it reveal? Avoiding conflict feels peaceful in the moment, but over time it produces three serious consequences. You lose respect for yourself first. Every time you stay silent when something matters, you feel it and it burns. It's a struggle to let it go. A quiet voice inside of you says, you should have said something. People stop respecting your boundaries second, not because they're evil, but because they never see where your line actually is. If a man never says no, people eventually assume the answer is always yes. And then relationships slowly rot. Not dramatically, they just do it quietly over time. Because unresolved issues, they don't disappear. They just go underground. And underground problems always come back later, usually bigger than before. So we need to realize conflict is not the enemy. We need to reframe this. Many men misunderstand conflict. Seriously, conflict is just not the enemy. Uncontrolled conflict is the enemy. There's a massive difference between anger and honesty, aggression and clarity, fighting and confronting. Now, healthy conflict is simply this: two people facing a problem honestly instead of pretending it doesn't exist. In fact, many strong relationships, they become stronger because conflict was handled well. It wasn't avoided. It was handled. The truth spoken calmly and boundaries communicated clearly. Respect is maintained. That's not weakness. That's maturity. So how do steady men approach conflict for a rebuild? A steady man doesn't rush into conflict, but he doesn't run from it either. He approaches it with 3 commitments. He speaks early first. The longer you wait, the heavier the conversation becomes. Small problems are easier to address early. He stays calm. If your emotions are boiling, you need to pause. Steady men confront problems when they can speak clearly, not when they're trying to win a fight. And then we need to focus on the issue, not the person. Instead of attacking someone's character, address the behavior. Not, you always do this, but this situation is bothering me and we need to talk about it. Clarity without cruelty, that's strength. So what's your role as a man? What's your responsibility? If you are a husband, a father, a leader, conflict avoidance eventually becomes abdication because leadership requires the courage to address reality, not to control people, not dominate conversations, but refuse to live inside unspoken problems. A steady man becomes someone people trust because they know something about him. He will deal with things honestly, not explosively, not silently, honestly. The discipline of healthy conflict repeats itself. Learning to face conflict is not a one-time decision. It's a discipline. You will still feel uncomfortable. Your heart may still beat faster. Your voice may shake. That's all normal. Courage is not the absence of discomfort. Courage is doing the right thing despite the discomfort. Over time, something powerful happens. You stop fearing conflict because you learn something most people never learn. Conflict handled well actually builds stronger relationships. If you've spent most of your life avoiding conflict, you're not alone. A lot of men learn that pattern early, but avoiding conflict is not the same thing as living in peace. Peace requires honesty, and honesty requires courage. A steady man learns to speak truth calmly, set boundaries clearly, and face problems without losing himself. That is not aggression. That is maturity. And when men learn that skill, their relationships, their families, and their lives become far more stable.